welcome back to Rising. I am back at the desk today with Shermichael Singleton. Always dapper.
I know. Thank you, Bri. I mean, it's fun to be back for another day of Rising.
All right. Well, we have a lot of really good news for you. Well, I don't know about good, but a lot of news for you.
A lot of news, right?
First up, Republicans have announced their first 3 witnesses in the impeachment inquiry hearings into President Joe Biden. They'll ask Bruce Dubinsky, a forensic accountant, Eileen O'Connor, a former Justice Department tax attorney, and conservative legal scholar Jonathan Turley to weigh in on the business dealings of the Biden family. Oversight Committee Chair James Comer told Fox over the weekend, quote, "We want to know what happened with the money once received by the Bidens in their personal account." This hearing is planned for Thursday.
Now, former Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi hit at Republicans' impeachment effort while on MSNBC yesterday. Let's check in.
The fact is, they have no goods. You know, they've been for months and months and months trying to make some kind of a charge. I don't think they'll ever bring it to the floor. They won't have the votes. They're members in districts that President Biden won. Not that they're so fond of President Biden, but these voters will say that's just not the right way to go. You know, everybody was on my case in 2007 when we got the majority, and they wanted us to impeach President Bush for the war in Iraq, the misrepresentations going in, departing from Afghanistan too soon, all of that. But if you have a difference of opinion, you just can't be impeaching. On the other hand, this is a fake distraction, as you said.
Meanwhile, Hunter Biden is again fortifying his legal offensive in the wake of the new federal gun charges. The Hill tweet he's suing Rudy Giuliani, accusing the former Trump lawyer of illegally disseminating his private laptop data. The Biden White House has denied any pay-for-play scheme and has referred all questions regarding the Hunter Biden investigation to the Department of Justice.
All right, Shermichael, do you think Pelosi is right? She's raised 2 points.
Yeah.
One, that there aren't, in her opinion, going to be enough votes for Republicans to impeach in the House, regardless.
Right. Yeah.
Pointing specifically to the fact that there are Republicans in districts that Biden won who just don't want to
running
poke
for
that
re-election,
bear.
of course.
Okay, so you agree with that
Yes.
point. And what about this other point, which might be only secondary given the first point, but that she's making the case that there's just no goods? There's been investigations ongoing for a long time that they're unlikely to find anything.
I mean, I don't know if you can necessarily say that. I mean, the point of bringing in a forensic accountant, I would presume, is to really see where money was moving and to whom. And so then I think once you talk to that individual and that person has an opportunity to go through probably hundreds, if not thousands of pages of financial documents, that'll really tell us whether or not there was some malpractice between the president's son and the president himself. But I have to tell you, Bri, overall, I would prefer for House Republicans to focus on kitchen table issues. I think this is going to be a very, very tight election. And I think the last thing the American people want is more hyper-partisanship and tribalism. They want their political leaders to work for them. I get that some within the Republican base want this, and I do believe if something inappropriate did occur, illegal did occur, we should investigate it. But I just would caution Republicans not to go down the rabbit hole with this.
Yeah, look, I'm inclined to agree. I saw a number of leftists and others pointing out that there was much more time spent in the Senate having discussions about John Fetterman's attire. Whatever you think about it, there was more time dedicated to John Fetterman's attire than the fact that the child poverty rate just doubled. So it does seem like there's a real priority mismatch there. What do you make of Nancy Pelosi bragging, as she's done before, that she declined to impeach Bush? Is that something that she should be proud of?
I mean, not necessarily, because what it sort of signals, I would argue, for some people watching that this entire thing is all about politics. Like, oh, we didn't impeach him for maybe they liked him a little bit more, whatever the case may be, but we did impeach Trump. And so some Trump voters may say, oh, well, this was all political because they just despised the guy so much because he attempted to take a wrecking ball to the Washington establishment. I'm not saying whether or not that is a legitimate argument or not, but I can see how some could arrive to that after listening to that statement. Look, again, Bri, I think Washington has become too politicized. It's become too much about political leaders and their particular interest groups, particularly those with monies to put money in their coffers, right? And less about the districts they represent or the states that they represent and the struggles of hardworking people, regardless of where they may fall along the ideological lines. And so I think people want a hard reset. I think people are tired of politics as usual. I think it's why people don't want Biden or Trump. They want someone else. But unfortunately, we don't have another option that appears to be capable of winning in a national election. So overall, I get the politics of it. But I would say to the speaker and even the former speaker and to the current speaker, let's try to move the country forward in a bipartisan way to accomplish something that's meaningful for hardworking people.
I think I asked you this maybe yesterday, but I'm still struggling with this idea that the polls suggest, I completely agree, that most Americans don't want a Biden-Trump matchup. There are primaries ongoing. The Democratic Party has done much more than the Republican Party to shut its primary down. They've said that incumbents don't have to participate in debates. The news media, the mainstream news media, largely ignores the presence of RFK Jr. or Marianne Williamson in the race, despite the fact that both of them have polled higher than most of the Republican field. I think the only, Ron DeSantis has been up in the 20-ish, which RFK Jr. also was. But regardless, the Democratic Party has shut it down. The Republican Party has been having a real primary, although Donald Trump has not been participating in the debates.
At all.
And yet, even given that the Republicans are allowing there to be a primary, no one has been able to break through. So how do you close the gap between Republicans don't want Trump to be the nominee, Democrats don't want Biden to be the nominee, and yet here we are with the opportunity for Republicans to choose someone else,
and they don't want
it's still not
else.
happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is at least, a third or a fourth of the Republican voting electorate who believe Trump should be given a second opportunity. And that's really interesting because if you ask those individuals about a second choice, would you vote for someone else if it were not Trump? Most of them say absolutely yes. And so I think it presents an interesting dichotomy, Bree, in many ways, because people are saying, and on one hand, I don't want this guy, but then some are saying, but I do want this guy. But if given a better alternative, 25%. I'll vote for the other alternative, and yet they're not deciding to vote for any of the alternatives.
Yes, I completely understand the argument that Trump has a base that is very committed. If it's 20%, 30%, 35%, whatever it is, it's nowhere near 50%.
No, it's not. But the interesting part is when you look at the polling data on this, about, I think 17%, if I remember the numbers correctly, who are sort of persuadables are saying, well, if Trump is the nominee, they will support him. And so I think that 38 to 39% that have allowed Trump to be so resounding for so long, so resoundingly strong, it sort of persuades others to say, well, he probably is going to be the nominee, so I should support him versus someone else.
That logic, I got to say, feels so destructive. You see polls showing that Nikki Haley could even beat Joe Biden.
Don't care.
And this was a similar situation the Democratic Party was back in 2016, where poll after poll after poll showed that Bernie Sanders consistently had a much bigger margin against Donald Trump in a head-to-head matchup than Hillary Clinton. But the mainstream media pushed this electability narrative that disadvantaged, ironically, Bernie Sanders. So I do wonder what role both the mainstream conservative media and conservative politicians are playing, party leadership, and not telegraphing that people really do have options. Because what it does feel like is like there's a kind of political capture happening at the top of the party where there's no validators of public opinion from within the party.
But remember what I said yesterday. Even if, when you look at, I think it was a political poll, I can't remember which outlet produced this a couple months ago, 2 months ago, but you take Trump's 39%. I think if you were to give him the 17% that are persuadable but leaning Trump, and then you remove everybody else and then give them all of the remaining percentage points, it's still not enough to surpass him.
Right, but I'm not trying to tally up why he's going to win the primary. I understand why he's going to win the primary. The question is why it is that if most Republican voters don't want Trump, period, why, one, there hasn't emerged someone who people are willing to coalesce around, and two, given how many Republicans there are, I think we went through 3 different candidates yesterday that in a head-to-head matchup beat Biden. What is deficient about those other...
only one. It was just Nikki Haley. DeSantis loses by 1 point, and then Trump was in a statistical
Interesting,
tie.
I definitely saw a poll within the last week that showed even Tim Scott could beat Biden in a head-to-head matchup. But regardless, why isn't it that given that there are these other people who have been demonstrated, at least in the basis of polls, as potential winners in a general election. No, wait a minute. Let me just finish this point. Given that's the case, why isn't there a more robust? I think, to me, the root of the problem has to come from the fact that the party itself is not willing to validate an alternative to Donald Trump. And the reason that the party itself, party leadership isn't willing to validate anybody alternative to Trump is because they are captured by Donald Trump, and they have all seen what happens if you speak out against him.
I don't think I agree with that. I think whether it's from the RNC to the more establishment elements of the party that still, for the most part, still run the more central components of the Republican Party, as I understand it, they did want someone else. It was Ron DeSantis. That did not work out.
How many endorsements has Ron DeSantis secured from leadership in the Republican Party?
The national endorsements are irrelevant. It's the state endorsements that are relevant. And wait, hold on, let me finish. And endorsements from Ohio, Iowa, and New Hampshire, DeSantis was actually raking them up pretty quickly. He actually was. And that's what really matters versus Ted Cruz endorsing Ron DeSantis or some other senator or congressperson endorsing Ron DeSantis. I think that will have less of an impact based on what we know historically from data versus someone at the state level who's a state legislature, a state senator, a state representative, a mayor. That I believe would have a far more direct impact on people deciding whether or not to give their support to that person. But with that said,
and how many endorsements of that sort has Ron DeSantis picked up in Iowa or New Hampshire? I don't know the exact number, but I do know it is quite a bit because Politico wrote about this, The Atlantic wrote about this. Just do a quick Google search. But I do know he was getting quite a few endorsements in Iowa, Ohio. But my point remains the same. It doesn't matter because if you're a Republican voter and you're seeing how strong Donald Trump is in the polls, then you're thinking, well, is it worth giving my support to someone else? Probably not, because it's probably not going to make a difference. But that's not politically what you should be thinking about. If you're a mayor, if you're the mayor, if you're a governor or a mayor in a place like Iowa or New Hampshire, the only reason you wouldn't vote your conscience or articulate your preferences and say, I prefer Ron DeSantis to be president, is if you're afraid of political consequences down the pike.
But
if you're afraid of Donald Trump coming into office and then punishing you for stating your preference.
But DeSantis has received local endorsements.
But that's exactly the kind of political pressure. And that's exactly what happened in 2016 with Bernie Haley. I'm just articulating a warning for you guys.
I understand that, but I would disagree in terms of no one having endorsed DeSantis in this particular example that we're debating.
There were national groups that, for no reason, absolutely, in terms of their ideologies, should have endorsed Hillary Clinton. Absolute no-brainers. But they all fell in line, whether it was national women's groups, whether it was national Planned Parenthood, all down the line. On every single issue, Hillary Clinton was to the right of Bernie Sanders. Hillary Clinton had failed, had articulated a less progressive policy on and on and on down the line. But there was a kind of groupthink and a political capture because if you step out of line and are against the Democratic Party, it's not just an abstract punishment. It is the DNC could and has promulgated rules to punish vendors that step out of line, that endorse insurgent candidates, have ruined political careers, etc. And I do think that what we're seeing, the reason why we end up in these situations, my subjective opinion, is that on both parties there's a kind of political capture that makes the public follow the lead of leadership and tastemakers.
So is the public not smart enough to sort of decide who they want to support? I mean, is the onus not on the public to do their own research, to have enough discernment to figure out who's the best of the candidates?
It's not about the public's intelligence. I don't dismiss that the public is the victim of a multi-billion-dollar propaganda effort. And I'm not going to sit there and say that you should just be stronger than the billions of dollars that are being spent to convince you.
I think you're removing all responsibility from the individual. I don't agree with that at all.
I don't think I'm removing all responsibility.
Oh, you absolutely are, because you're saying, well, it's a billion-dollar entity that's using, psychological ops to sort of persuade the public to vote and believe one thing versus supporting, in your case, your guy, Bernie Sanders. Maybe people decided that they didn't think Senator Sanders could be elected in a national election. So is that not a probability?
I'm speaking from data and specifics. I'm talking about the billions of dollars that are spent in a campaign cycle. You can say that that money is being wasted and all the people who are spending that money are doing it for funsies and not to have a political effect. But that money works. Advertising works. Political campaign ads work.
It works.
And when you have millions of dollars in earned media as a consequence of, let's say, Joe Biden winning a presidential race in a primary campaign in South Carolina after Bernie won the first 3 contests, and in Nevada, the media started running. Wait a minute.
Why?
The media started running articles about how he was captured by Putin, and that's why he won Nevada. And Chris Matthews and Talking Heads.
No one remembers
Wait a minute.
that.
You might not remember it, Sir Michael, because that wasn't your candidate, it wasn't your fight, and it wasn't your interest.
Yeah, most voters don't care about that. Well, why do you think Joe Biden won in South Carolina?
The Democratic Party has incredibly deep roots and very strong organizing basis in South Carolina.
James Clyburn.
Yeah, James Clyburn. 60% of South Carolina voters said that they voted because Jim Clyburn told them to, which validates exactly my point. Thank you for bringing that up, Sir Michael, because that's exactly my point. Party validators are leading the way on so many of these voter decisions because most people don't have the time.
When you look at focus group data on why black people voted for Biden over Bernie Sanders, most of them will say because they believe Joe Biden had a better odds of defeating Donald Trump versus
That's exactly
Bernie
what I've been
Sanders.
saying this whole time, though, Sir
And
Michael.
I don't think that has anything to do with them being persuaded somehow by some political conglomerate with some type that's in a dark room trying to fool the American people.
You keep adding words and sentences. I said specifically that there was an electability argument that was made to convince people that Hillary Clinton was more likely to beat Donald Trump. That's literally what you just said. Even though the polls suggested the opposite, and history has demonstrated that.
I think people can arrive to that opinion on their own, just like I believe Republican voters are looking at the current slate of Republican candidates and are saying they believe Donald Trump is the better option.
All right. Well, good luck. Hillary Clinton lost. And we'll see what happens going forward into 2024.
Well,
we got to push on, I'm afraid, but we have more Rising for you right after this.